Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Ken Goudsward. Before I bring him on, a couple of announcements. March 11th, 12th, and 13th, we got Forbidden Knowledge News Con. It's going to be online with a Rokfin premium membership. You get the entire conference for only $10. Just sign up through the link in the description or go to rokfin.com/FKN+. You get the conference, all our premium content, and all the content from all the creators on Rokfin. Our new free episodes are always available on Rokfin, Odysee, and all podcast platforms. Our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. It's also the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. You'll find some amazing podcasts on there. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All those links are right in the description. Unfortunately, there are still some of us out there that have to deal with mask mandates at work or for work or even to get on a plane. Check out Fake Mask. Fake Mask has the most breathable and authentic-looking masks on the market. They're sure to get you into stores, on airplanes, and into your job. Click the link in the description. You can get 10% off your order. Today I want to welcome Ken Goudsward. He is a best-selling author and independent researcher whose interests include archaeology, philology, ontography, epistemology, and thaumaturgy. He writes in a variety of genres, including nonfiction, science fiction, dark comedy, and poetry. Ken, welcome. How you doing?
I'm great, Chris. How are you?
I am awesome. I've been looking forward to this. It's going to be a great discussion. This is one of my favorite topics. It's the evidence of possible documented UFO and ET or interdimensional sightings and contact experiences from biblical texts. I have to admit that for some of the scriptures, the best explanation is that of a paranormal, even extraterrestrial origin. So this is going to be great. This is your first time on. I'd love for you to tell us more about yourself and what got you started researching these topics.
Sure. So I grew up in a Christian home and was very involved in the church. And but I always have been kind of a person who likes to ask more questions. And one thing that sort of bothered me is when you would often get these we used to call them the pat answer, and it was like, oh, this is the accepted. It's the same type of thing that you get in mainstream of anything, where there's the status quo, and you can't really go beyond that at all, or even ask questions. So a few years back, I can't remember how I got onto it, but I wrote this book, Magic in the Bible, and then that got me into this UFOs in the Bible. And so there's a lot of really interesting passages in the Bible that we don't talk about at church, or if we do, they are very like either just brushed over or explained away or swept under the rug or whatever. And it's strange, because if you consider this book to be the Word of God, then wouldn't you want to understand what God is saying in His Word, and rather than just go, oh no, so someone told me it was this. So that's weird. And yeah, like as I got into just doing more research, I began to just see different things where what we think we know is very different from what the Bible says, or just from any other reality in anything as well. And that crops up in all kinds of disciplines, as well as just
I was just thinking of even paintings. You can go back hundreds of years and see different works of art that depict possibly things in the sky that are unexplained. Other ancient texts from Babylonian to Egyptian all seem to have this theme of beings coming from the sky and
Right.
influencing humans. So that's very interesting. So let's start, I guess, with the Old Testament today and some of the earliest accounts that that you've looked at that could link to possible off-planet activity.
Sure. So since you mentioned the Babylonian text, here's an interpretation I have of the Enuma Elish, which is the Akkadian, I guess, technically, but
Right.
one of the Sumerian myths. And so that's very ancient. Like, we don't really know how old it is, but probably at least most people would say about 6,000 years. In terms of maybe not, it wasn't necessarily written in that form, but the story's been around for that long. So it predates most of the stories that we read about in the Bible by a couple thousand years. But even so, the Bible is chock full of these ancient stories, and also strangely refers to previous stories which are not included in the Bible. So, for example, there are numerous verses in the book of Genesis where they essentially just make a reference to a previous something that the writer assumes people know about. So in Genesis chapter 4, I believe, where they're talking about the Nephilim, they mention these are the heroes of old, and so the assumption there is that the reader knows what they're talking about. Who are these heroes of old? So he doesn't bother naming them. He just says, oh yeah, you guys already know this story, but we don't know that story, unless maybe he is actually talking about the previous Sumerian literature, which is entirely possible. They are next door neighbors. Abraham is from Sumeria, and there's also a lot of influence from Egyptian culture, obviously, with the Exodus coming out of Egypt. And the Egyptian culture itself is not what we think it is, because the people, like the mainstream academia of Egyptology right now is very big into the dynastic things and the late kingdom and all this stuff, which is, I mean, that's fine, but they also don't really even want to look at any theories that suggest that some of these megaliths are a lot older, even though there's very solid evidence for that. So even there, you have why you have people whose life is that they're interested in ancient Egypt. And well, if I'm interested in ancient Egypt, I'm going to want to know all this stuff. I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm not talking about that. But that's what's happening, and it's very strange. I mean, part of it is that, people get entrenched in their knowledge and they become the expert. So if we begin to question their knowledge, then their authority also has to go out the door. So people don't like that.
Yeah,
it makes sense, but it's sad. So you had asked where in the oldest parts or whatever.
Yeah, we could maybe start with the Old Testament. Yeah.
So there are hints and clues all the way back to the very beginning. Even Genesis 1, verse 1. The way that we translate it is extremely inaccurate, in my opinion. I don't believe that verse says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Because if you look at the Hebrew, there is no word created there. That word does not go into the Hebrew sentence. And it's also not God. So we've mixed up the verb and the subject already. And what it actually says is something more like, in the beginning might not even be very accurate, but I'll skip over that and assume for now that's okay. So what a better reading of that particular verse is that in the beginning, the Elohim separated the earth from heaven, or from space, or from the sky, which is a drastically different rendition of when we're building our entire assumptions on that. And like really, excuse me, that is a very foundational verse. It's the first verse, the first sentence in the entire Bible. And it's really the only place where the Bible gives any kind of indication that God created the universe. That topic isn't ever addressed directly, although it is hinted at. So if that's the basis for that whole theology, then what does that mean when we find out that actually that's not even what that verse says?
Right. And go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that's exactly right. Now, maybe we should get into some of the things, like, as for example, Moses' life seemed pretty profound when it comes to possible contact and off-planet or interdimensional entities.
Yes.
Maybe we should start with some of the earliest stories from the accounts of Moses.
Sure. No, I'm just trying to reach for a book here.
Yep.
I've got this this other book that I want to mention. So, there's this theory that that the Pharaoh Akhenaten is actually Moses. So this book is amazing. It's very thick. It's not just like, oh, here's a crazy idea. It's got over 250 different evidentiary bits, which are each of them on their own are quite circumstantial, but taken as a group are extremely substantial. And I believe that Jonathan Perrin is correct when he says that Moses actually was the Pharaoh Akhenaten. And he didn't even come up with the idea. It has been the subject of a few books, like previously, about in the last 100 years. Sigmund Freud actually wrote a book about it. He was one of I think the second book that came out. So it's a fascinating idea because in the Bible we are given a very quick story about Moses's birth and basically he was hidden in the river and ended up being raised in the Pharaoh's household. Okay, so if you're raised in the Pharaoh's household, and keep in mind the Pharaoh is not just the king, like the compared to the most powerful man in the world nowadays, Pharaoh is 10 or 20 times more than that. People see him as a god in like literal form, and he is also seen to possess magical abilities. His court is essentially a university and a church and a court and a whole bunch of these other kinds of institutions that we now have separated. His were all rolled into one. There were healing. It was the center for healing, divination, and a whole bunch of different stuff was going on. So when you were growing up in that environment, you were basically now getting a master's degree or a doctorate in a whole bunch of really cool, interesting, crazy stuff that we can't even begin to comprehend right now, as well as a whole lot of other stuff like history and writing and mathematics and all that kind of stuff. So Moses was very, very well educated, and he was essentially a magician, or a sorcerer or a wizard or whatever you want to call it. So to cut that entire story out of the Bible, because the Bible doesn't mention any of that, it makes you wonder, like, if they're not telling us that, A, what else are they not telling us? And B, why? So basically the Bible picks up with Moses having lived in Egypt, but basically being exiled because he was involved in a manslaughter charge, basically. and forced out of the country. So he's out in the wilderness, and suddenly something appears to him, and he looks at it and goes, "Oh, what's going on?" And it starts talking to him. Now, this is typically known as the burning bush, but there's a problem with that because it's not a bush. There's no evidence that was a bush. The Hebrew word that is used there is hasanah, and it's not a bush. There's other words in Hebrew that mean bush, and there's at least two other words that are used over and over. If you look at the story of Abraham, when Abraham had to sacrifice his son Isaac, and suddenly a ram appeared in the bush, that's not the same word. So this is not the same thing. And furthermore, the word hasanah appears only once in the entire Old Testament. So we have no idea what it means, but it's not a bush. Now, so I have to make a little bit of explanation for that, because what we have to realize is the Bible is basically the only source of ancient Hebrew in existence, because all of the ancient Hebrew texts were gathered up and ended up being called the Bible. Well, that's not totally true. There's a few other ones that are, didn't make the cut in terms of canonical, but maybe should be in there. However, most people basically disregard all that stuff. So when it comes to Hebrew, the ancient Hebrew people were taken into captivity in Babylon around 500 BC, and they took over the culture of Babylon. Daniel was part of that, the prophet Daniel, as well as Isaiah and Ezekiel. They were all in Babylon. And what happened in that time is they basically lost their culture. So it's very similar to the First Nations people that we have here in where I am in Canada, where they are now starting to reclaim some of their culture. And one of the ways of doing that is trying to rebuild the language, which is difficult because nobody knows how to speak it. Now, luckily, in our case, there was always a few people around who remembered. But in the case of Israel, they had been in captivity for quite a long time. And basically, by the time they were able to rebuild their culture, there was nobody left who remembered how to do it. So they went back to their scriptures and basically began to make a dictionary out of that. So it's actually completely true that when there's a word in the Bible that only happens once, nobody knows what it means. And the only reason that we think we do is because somebody somewhere, while they were translating it into English or Latin or Greek, someone decided, oh, that means this. And we've all been just going, oh, okay, and not questioning it. But some of the evidence is very, very sketchy.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure you could agree that these texts, and especially the biblical text, were basically hijacked throughout history by different individuals that didn't either agree with the writings or wanted to make it their own, or change them for whatever reason, to gain power or to keep knowledge from people. Whatever it is, it happened many times with these texts, and I think that's a lot where the misunderstandings come in, and people's lack of understanding at all about what they're reading in this stuff,
Right. And some of these texts are actually very badly misused in terms of adding fodder to some kind of other agenda that people are trying to build. For example, the concept of hell. You're very hard pressed to find any kind of scriptural backup in the Old Testament for the concept of hell. And when Jesus comes along, he doesn't talk about hell. There's one time that he sounds like he might be, but he's not. He's actually talking about a garbage dump. And then nobody really cares about hell until Paul comes along and makes a big, huge thing about it, because his agenda is that he needs you to do his thing to get the salvation that he's selling to save you from hell. Well, you can't do that if there's no such thing as hell. So there's all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And yeah, Christianity is very fraught with a lot of that stuff. But then again, so is, I don't know, democracy, or
Yeah.
name anything.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, everything that in our history, from our education to politics to economics, everything is not the way it's being portrayed in reality. And a lot of people are
Yeah.
finding out now, so and I think that's a good thing. I want to go back to Moses for a little bit. There are a few things that you've cited that could also point to, extraterrestrial activity, such as the mountain of the Elohim.
Mm.
And you were just mentioned the entity that could have been in the burning bush, but it wasn't really a burning bush. What are some of those instances we could talk about?
Right. So, yeah, I did mention the burning bush, and I can't really go into too much more detail about it because honestly, there's not much detail given.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to Mount Sinai, which is just a few months after the burning bush, and so Moses has successfully brought the people out of Egypt, and they're all standing there, and there's estimates range between I don't know, like 10,000 and up to 5 million people who were in the Exodus. So there's this huge crowd, right? And they get, excuse me. So they get to Mount Sinai, and everyone sees this. This is not something that Moses only sees. The entire nation sees this humongous, like flaming smoke cloud. I don't know, like they describe it as like a storm. Um, Seems to have flashes of lightning, and it's really loud and it shakes the whole mountain, they say. So something big is going down on top of Mount Sinai. Next thing you know, the people are somehow given a message from this being that's on top of the mountain. And it's not clear how that works. But if you're going to talk to 10,000 to 5 million people, you're going to either need some kind of broadcasting equipment, loudspeakers and whatnot, amplification, or I suppose you could do it telepathically. So, but it certainly is not the case of there's just a guy standing there talking. So something weird is happening with up to 5 million people, and those people don't like it. They find it very difficult to it's not a nice experience for them. So they say to Moses, "Hey, make this stop. If this guy has something to tell us, why don't you go up and talk to him, and then you come and tell us what he wants or whatever." Right. So, and that's totally clear in the book of Exodus. Like, I'm not reading between the lines or anything. That's exactly what it says. So then we have this concept, this sort of very simplified Sunday school version of the story where Moses goes up the mountain. God gives him 2 pieces of stone that have writing on it. That's the 10 Commandments. He comes back down and gives it to the people. Yeah, that's totally not what happened. So if you actually read the narrative, you're going to have to do a little bit of reading. It's not just one chapter. So I suggest to anybody who wants to dig into this, you kind of have to read the whole book of Exodus. But if you read my book, it'll walk you through the process a lot in a lot more detail. So kind of putting the timeline together. But basically, Moses goes up and down this mountain 6 or 7 times, depending on there's one thing that you're not sure if he actually came back down or not. And at one point, and this is something that you will be very hard pressed to find a sermon about. But there is in Exodus chapter 14, Moses and some of his advisors and stuff like that, assistants or whatever, and also 70 elders. So like kind of the whole, I don't know, Senate or whatever. And so there's like 76 people. They all go up the mountain. This is in Exodus 14. They all go up the mountain, and they see something. They see the Elohim. That's the literal word that's in there. So when we think of Moses seeing God, we have to be really careful what word we're looking at there. Is it Elohim or is it Yahweh? Because those are different concepts. So in this case, 76 people go up, they see the Elohim. Not only that, they sit down and they have supper with them. And then some of in the narrative, it's talking about some of the more impressive looking parts of what they see up there. And it's strange because they don't talk about, the food. They don't talk about like what God looks like. Well, like a little bit, but it's like, okay, there's this like shining sapphire throne and God is on it. That's like literally all they say. But they do take a great pains to explain how beautiful the floor is. And the floor is this beautiful blue, shining sapphire, like amazing looking floor. Okay, so if you're standing before God, are you actually paying attention to the floor? I mean, okay, something's not right here. But yeah, there's this, everybody knows that you can't see God, because if you see God, you will die. No one can see God and live. And yet here's 76 of them. So what's happening here? And there's a lot of other stuff that that is quite detailed, that if you kind of have to loop back and read the story and then come to other parts and then read it again and do that. So that's kind of the approach I took with this book. And what began to stand out was a lot of these details like this, like the blue floor. Okay. And just the way that these words, a lot of these words seem to be mistranslated. So digging into these, well, what's happening here? What could this mean other than what we think it means?
Yeah, I love it, man.
And so,
I think this is what we need, better understanding of this stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when doing that, with these looping throughs and stuff, like some of these like sapphire keeps popping up. In Exodus, it's in the book of Isaiah, it's in Ezekiel and Deuteronomy. It's associated with the Ark of the Covenant, and it's also associated with the Ten Commandments, the tablet. And so it actually seems like, again, for this stuff, you do have to kind of read between the lines, because not everything is clearly defined. But in this particular case, it seems like they had some kind of storage technology, and maybe like holograms or something weird, like some kind of digital and computational technology that's involved in some of these things that they're talking about. So the Ark of the Covenant is a big part of that. The cherubim is a huge thing, and so I kind of go.
Yeah, I was just about to ask about the cherubim and angels and beings like this. Some of your interpretations about that.
Yeah, so I don't see very much evidence in the Old Testament for angels at all. If you also look at the ancient Jewish, like what do Jews believe about angels? And currently, it's pretty similar to the kind of stuff that you normally would hear, especially like the Catholic Church is huge into angels, the Protestant Church less so, but they're still, even if people don't really believe in them, they're still part of the theology. But there's a wide range of belief around that. But essentially, every Christian will say, "Oh yeah, angels are these spiritual beings, and they help God out, or they serve Him, or whatever. They're His messengers." And there's a lot of evidence for God having messengers, or for the Elohim having messengers. So a lot of these encounters in the Old Testament are, the Hebrew word actually means messenger. So it's used for these so-called angelic messengers that we see in a lot of these encounters. But it's also used for, the king sent a messenger over to his buddy. So it's clear that it really is a messenger. There's no indication, because that's the only word that's used for during most of these things. There's no indication that that these are non-human or even extraterrestrial. Although some of the way that some of these guys show up makes you wonder what's going on, because they seem to just suddenly appear, or they fly in from the sky. So that's where you start to get some of the possible extraterrestrial connections in terms of mostly how they show up, less about the actual descriptions of themselves. However, so that applies to a lot of the so-called angelic instances in the Old Testament. But there's this other set where you have, instead of the word malaka, which is the messengers, you have other words like cherubim, seraphim, and some other things like that. Now, the cherubim is related to the word Elohim in the way that they both end in HIM, which means basically the people who, blah, blah, blah. So it's essentially people, but not necessarily human people. And in fact, definitely not human people, because most of the stuff that they're talking about can't be done by human people. So they're talking about some kind of other intelligent race. And generally, they seem to come from somewhere else, or they are already still somewhere else. Maybe they don't even come here. Like, for example, in the first verse of the Bible, the Elohim separated, or we say created, the heavens and the earth. How did they do that? Doesn't even necessarily mean that they came here. Maybe it was as simple as drawing a line on a map and saying, okay, this is Earth. But there's a lot of weird things happening with the Elohim, and the cherubim is similar. And I'm actually doing a in-depth study now for a future book regarding a whole bunch of these races, because there's not just Elohim and cherubim and seraphim. There's a bunch of other ones like Raphaim. There's Hamayim, Hamasaim. Like, there's probably I've got about 50 of these words that end with im, and some of them seem to be just normal people. Like, one of them means basically blacksmith, right? So it's like the people who do this kind of thing. But some of them are obviously non-human. Some of them are aquatic beings. Some of them are said to be sky beings. And so there's a lot of stuff going on in here that is completely overlooked in any of our translations. But one of those things is the cherubim, and we just say, oh, they're angels, but there's no such thing as angels. So that is not a suitable explanation. And I do look into several ways of interpreting it. I don't know what a cherubim is, and I don't tell you in the book. But what I do is look at, okay, well, could it be, based on what we know and based on what these eyewitnesses are telling us, what are several things it could be? And so what I come up with is some type of machinery, some type of computational device, possibly some kind of software like an AI sort of a thing. And so there's all these weird ideas that are kind of like, well, it's something strange, something high tech by the sounds of it, but we don't really know what it is. And maybe we don't even have that technology to compare it to yet.
Well, what are some of the things that lead you to believe it might be some sort of technology?
Well, when you look at the book of Ezekiel, primarily Ezekiel and Isaiah, So I talk about both of those two guys, and both of them had numerous encounters, not just a single encounter. And when you look at Ezekiel, we always hear about these wheels within wheels. Well, that's the cherubim. Now, it doesn't say that in Ezekiel 1, but it does say it later on in the book, because at first, Ezekiel is describing what he sees and he has no bloody clue what he's looking at. So he's just trying to make sense of it. Later on, after his third or fourth UFO visitation, he begins to put some of the puzzle pieces together, and eventually he tells us, oh yeah, these are, like, he starts talking about them differently, and he doesn't necessarily go, oh, this is that, but he starts talking about it differently. So now he's talking about the cherubim, and we're like, what's a cherubim? Oh, maybe it's that thing that he was talking about earlier with the wheels and the faces and all that. So the other thing is that we're using these words that are difficult to define, and we're constructing them into very strange artifices, such as a being with 4 faces and 6 wings, and it's got eyes all around, and it's got the face of a man and the face of an eagle and the face of an ox. Like, this doesn't make any sense, you guys. What are you talking about? Have you ever seen any animal that has more than one face? No.
Right.
And if God is the creator, he is an intelligent creator, and he uses an intelligent design. That intelligent design is defined by certain rules. All the animals on Earth have the same basic blueprint with modifications. There's no animals on Earth that have numerous faces. So I don't buy that. And then just the word itself, the words that we're looking at there are not very clear. And especially when you consider that Ezekiel is trying to describe something very crazy. And so he's kind of grasping at straws in terms of how to do that. And then the interpreters now are trying to grasp at straws to make some kind of sense about that, because, you know, it's important for teachers to make sure that they know everything. And that's the only reason that I think that any of that translation is there, is because, well, they have to know something, but it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't. Well, what other evidence could we look at that could be possibly evidence of high technology or advanced technology throughout the Bible?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are pretty subtle. There's this story that I've never heard of before until I started looking at this, and that was after Moses' death, the people are about to enter the Promised Land. So they're standing at the banks of the Jordan River, and their new leader Joshua has taken over from Moses, and basically he gives a nice speech, and he says, a lot of Christians will quote this verse, because this is where he says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Now, let's put that into context. So what Joshua says is, hey, you guys, I'll paraphrase this a little bit. Hey guys, here we are. We made it through the desert. We were wandering for 40 years, following this weird flying thing around in the desert. And here we are. So you guys know that Yahweh brought us here, and Yahweh wants us to follow him. Now, remember, back in the day of our forefathers, and he refers to Abraham and Abraham's father Terah, and he literally says, remember that Abraham and Terah and their fathers served different gods across the river. And the thought is that he's referring to across the Euphrates River in Sumeria. So essentially what he's saying is, hey, before Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees, they were worshiping different gods. Well, okay, but isn't there only one God? Well, no, that's not what the Bible says. So, and the Bible talks about many gods in a lot of places. So basically, Joshua says, okay, so you guys can do whatever you want. I mean, like Yahweh has invited us to come with him, but it's up to you. You're everyone's free to make their choice. But I'm going to go with Yahweh, and I'm going to cross this river. Who else is in? And everyone's like, yay! So so he's like, okay, cool. I'm going to now bury this stone underneath this tree right here. And this is a big, ancient, old tree, gnarly old thing with little holes by the roots. And it's like a well-known spot. Okay, so people know about that tree near Shechem. If you want to meet somebody, just go to the tree near Shechem. And he's like, okay, I'm going to bury this stone, and it will be a reminder. It will basically, what he's saying is, I've taken a recording of you guys saying yes, you agree, and I'm going to stow it here in this safety deposit box in case I have to come back and prove that you said this. Like that's what he says. Is basically, you guys, I don't necessarily trust that you're not going to go back on your word, so I'm going to stick this recording here so that it will be a witness to you. Now, how exactly does a rock have the ability to contain that information? Well, I mean, I guess he could scratch it on. And I don't know. And it almost sounds like, because they already have the Ark of the Covenant, and they already have these sapphire crystals that are in it. To me, it sounds like he actually took the sapphire crystals out of the Ark of the Covenant and recorded, like hit record somehow, and then took the disc out and stuck it under the tree, because it's important that these guys are making a commitment that is going to affect the entire rest of the history of their nation. They're supposed to go in. They know it's going to be a long, hard process to take over this land. They don't have tanks and stuff. And yeah, so he's like, okay, you guys are committed to this. This is proof. So we can come back to this if we need to. And that's kind of the only way that makes any sense to me, because how else are you going to prove such a concept? Like, you can't do it with scratching a single word into a rock. People are going to go, oh, what does that mean? Yeah, so we said yes. What did we say yes to? Right?
Yeah. Now,
so that's strange.
It is. You mentioned a term earlier, Raphaim, and I've had other individuals that kind of equate that to giants, or very, very large humans. Would you say the same thing, that this means a giant human?
So the Raphaim and the Nephilim are both sort of used for this giants thing. Mm-hmm. And there does seem to be some reason for that. Honestly, I haven't gotten super into that particular word yet. Although, well, that's not true. I kind of have. And so I think that there's some other concepts that I think also play into it. And the Raphaim specifically is often translated as the evil ones or the wicked ones, or basically criminals, or the criminal element. And there's this concept of the Nephilim, because of their coming down to earth and breeding with human women, that basically the reason that they got in trouble for that is because they weren't authorized to do so. So they shouldn't have done it, period, or it's not really that bad that they did it, but they did it in the wrong way. Because here's the thing, there's a lot of other circumstantial evidence that there was an authorized way that the gods or the Elohim were already messing around with human DNA. Now, I can't prove that, but there's a few clues, and which I won't really get into because honestly, they're a little too sketchy in my mind right now. But I will say that there's clues, and one of those big clues is this idea of the flood. So when Noah was getting ready to go in the ark, Yahweh told Noah, or actually it wasn't even well, okay, never mind. So Noah's getting ready to get in the ark, and basically the narrative around that is that God saw Noah as a righteous man, but the word for righteous there is less about actions and morality and more about like a physical purity. So to me, it indicates that Noah was a pure bloodline of some kind. And I hate to even say that phrase because it just smacks of Nazism and Aryanism and all this bullshit. But that seems to be what the Bible is dealing with. And so, and it seems to be a, something that God was doing. So I'm not going to call God a Nazi,
Right.
but maybe some of the same, some of the same ideas are kind of working through here. And so when you come back to Adam and Eve, and if God created man and woman, then you have these Nephilim that come down and they mate with the daughters of man, and it's always the male. So this motif shows up in other mythologies as well, in the Sumerian as well, and but it's always the male extraterrestrials coming and impregnating the females, the female humans. Now, I'm going to use the word humans loosely because if we're humans now and we're after this event happened, then whoever was here before is not the same as us because we've got this alien DNA.
Right.
So, but well, let's just call them humans, even though we're not. Okay, so either they're not human or we're not human. Either way. But there's this long, it reminds me of, if you are familiar with the Frank Herbert novels Dune and its sequels, one thing that they have in there is this thing called the Bene Gesserit, which is it's basically, they call them witches, but they're a religious order who have this very long-standing program of genetic breeding because they're trying to make some kind of messiah. Well, that's, I think, the same kind of thing, is that we're talking about these very, very long-standing programs that take a long time, but basically we're just in a lab, and there's some kind of scientific experiment going on, and scientific experiments have to be controlled. There's certain factors that they want to control and certain ways that they want to see what happens. So when your lab assistant comes in and starts screwing around with your experiment and starts interjecting his DNA, God's probably pissed off at these idiot Nephilim, or these guys who come in and wreck his experiment. So that to me really makes a lot of sense, where he's like, no, I've got to start over. Okay, flood this place, right?
Yeah. That's interesting.
Because I don't see it as a punishment. And that's really not, I think it's hard to read it as a punishment if you understand what you're reading in Genesis 6 and 7. So it's also interesting in there because there's a lot of these other words, like the word ish, which is a Hebrew word that basically means different. And there's all these concepts that are coming in. So you've got purity, you've got the different people, and you've got these other parts of the story, such as the Nephilim and the wicked ones, the Raphaim. So to me, all of those factors combined seem to be a very strong evidence that, yeah, actually God was trying to do some particular experiment, and then this other event happened and these guys screwed up his experiment and he had to wipe the slate clean and start over. Hence Noah.
Yeah. Now, I think you mentioned the Watchers. I think there's a lot of misinterpretation on this word as well. Some have associated with the Nephilim. What is
Yeah.
your idea of the Watchers?
Okay, so the Watchers doesn't show up very clearly in the Bible itself. It's mostly from the Book of Enoch, which most Christians don't consider part of the Bible. Many do. So again, the Book of Enoch is a kind of a fascinating thing, and what it's definitely part of my ongoing research in terms of um, I think I kind of combine the idea of the Watchers and the Nephilim in this way, that the Watchers were supposed to be uh, kind of hands off, and they were monitoring the situation. So if you look at this experiment again, they were basically taking data and reporting on how the experiment is going. Um, they were not supposed to be getting the experiment pregnant. And when they did, the Nephilim are the babies that occurred from that. So the now this also comes into play with other concepts from other like from the Sumerian. The Anunnaki are often equated with the Watchers, um, which is sort of like yeah, I'm not going to like argue against that. In my Enuma Elish book, I have a little bit of a different take on the Anunnaki, and it actually has more to do with the sort of the governance structure of a global Senate, and not global, universal Senate, or at least a galactic. So in my interpretation of the Enuma Elish, there is basically a galactic empire, and the Anunnaki is set up as a navigational system, but later becomes referred to as people from around, sort of like how we would say, if you're from the West, or if you're a northern country, or things like that. And so I think we end up conflating these ideas about place and the people who are from those places. And to me, I think that's why there's some confusion around the Anunnaki. But also, again, the Enuma Elish is pretty obvious to me, that they're talking about this zodiacal uh, division of of space, and which is necessary in order to navigate through space from one end of the galaxy to another. And it's a fascinating read. I would recommend people pick up that book as well. That's this one here, the Enuma Elish, and it was very surprising how much technology comes out of that book. And I didn't even do any reinterpretation of any Sumerian words. I'm using the straight up normal accepted English translation of the Enuma Elish, and basically just trying to figure out what they're talking about. And it was very obvious to me. So I don't know why nobody's noticed it before. Or maybe somebody has. Well, how do I know?
Yeah. Well, when you look at the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament, it seems like there's two completely different gods running the show, and the Old Testament seems pretty vengeful, maybe a little angry, jealous at times, and the New Testament is this loving God. It makes me think of the Anunnaki mythos, where there's these two kind of creator brother extraterrestrials that have different ideas of the outcome for humanity, and one Enlil gets angry and kind of wipes out his creation, and Enlil might be a little bit more loving, and I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's. I think there's definitely some merit to that interpretation. However, in my UFOs in the Bible book, there's I actually end up reinterpreting some of those vengeful looking events because a lot involved here. A lot of those times where God wiped out a whole bunch of people, actually, it wasn't really that's not really what went down. It was more like these people got radiation poisoning or something, and then God had to intervene in some way. So it almost makes him seem nicer. But yeah, I get that. I get what you're saying. There's definitely that thread through there.
What do you think happens in this major difference of the Old Testament and the New Testament to where it seems like it's two completely different creator beings?
Yeah, well, I would say that I'm going to say not even two. I'm going to say three. I'm going to say there's the Old Testament, and then there's the Gospels, and then there's the rest of the New Testament. So the writings of Paul and the other apostles. So what I see there is three very different and radically different concepts of who God is, who humanity is, who we are, what our job is in the universe, why we're here, all that kind of thing. So very philosophical, deep philosophical differences. And basically, well, Jesus was Jewish in terms of, he was born in Israel with Jewish heritage. However, if you read Jesus's actions and words and writings, not that he wrote it himself, but if you read the Gospels, Jesus is basically a Buddhist, like just purely going by what you see. He certainly doesn't say that, but I believe that actions speak louder than words. And Jesus does not go around saying, "Hey, I'm the man. You got to follow me. I'm going to save you. I'm here." As he's sort of like he kind of does, but he does it in this way where it's like one of Jesus's main messages is probably his main message. The thing that he said. So he's got two things going on. He's healing people and he's saying some stuff. The healing by far outweighs the speaking. He's not really interested in telling people what's what. But when he does talk, he says consistently, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And to me, what that means is there's two ways to live in this world. You can be in hell or you can be in heaven. You can read the Twitter and go down that rabbit hole, or you can choose to love and to be a light worker and to do nice things and to heal. And so really, like, his words are very paralleling what he's doing, because he's going around, he's healing, he's giving, he's just being very sacrificial in terms of like being a really nice person who shares what he has. And so his disciples do pick up on that at first, and we get that in terms of the story of Peter and James when they say, they meet a man on the side of the road who's begging for coins. They say, well, we don't have any money, but here's what we do have, and they heal the guy. And so Jesus taught his disciples how to heal. How does he do that? We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us how, except that it kind of does, because it tells us that he is always focused on love and light and healing. And so that's how you do it. And honestly, it does work. I've done it before. I've healed people myself, and using that same methodology. So Jesus heals the same way that any one of us can heal. Then the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Well, that is the kingdom of heaven. When you choose to step into that lifestyle, you are now living in the kingdom of heaven, because it's a beautiful place to be. Then his whole story gets twisted into this whole other thing where it's like, we're all terrible people and we need something to intervene. And so here, eat this piece of bread. That'll fix it. like it's weird. What is happening here?
Yeah.
And so that's the stuff that we are still mostly left with in terms of what is this religion, and it's kind of all the wrong parts.
Mhm.
And there's, it's weird.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense in so many aspects. Now, while we're on the topic of Jesus, there's some argue that Jesus didn't exist. He definitely wasn't who they say he was. He even went by a different name. What are
Mhm.
your thoughts of the basic concept of Jesus and who he was? Do you think he might have been a hybrid or extraterrestrial?
Well, it's possible, but in the exact same way that you are.
Hmm.
So um, maybe people are still like, maybe this experiment is still ongoing, and if there's any truth to the eyewitness accounts that are happening currently, it seems to indicate that's true, because we have even some of the most famous stories of UFO abductions, even the Betty and Barney Hill case. There are elements of um, some kind of, like, I don't know if it's sexual or at least some kind of, like, there's some weird stuff going on where they're getting probed and all this stuff, right?
Right.
So there's something happening here, and it seems to be scientific. It seems to have something to do with genetics and modification and DNA and all that. Um, and then, yeah, so if that is the case, it makes sense that it would still be going on, because remember back when God decided to wipe out the experiment with the flood and start over again? Well, he hasn't done that again, so because we're still here, so the experiment is still going. Um, so, but yeah, okay, so Jesus. Well, it was a long time ago, but then again, we have pretty good records. Did all these guys make it all up? Maybe. Um, who knows? I mean, did everybody make up everything that we've ever known? Partly, because I don't think anybody ever tells the entire truth, because nobody knows the whole truth. Everybody only has a skewed perception. Um, but I would say that the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the gospel writers, were attempting to explain what they saw. Now, of course, there's problematic. It's problematic a little bit, because how do you write down something that happened years ago? Apparently, these books were written between, well, I don't know, 50 years later after the facts, something like that. And so if you were to ask me to write down, what happened to me when I was 5 years old, I'm not going to do a very good job. And there's a lot of details in the Gospels that you got to wonder how anybody remembered that, especially when there are a couple of parts where it seems like they're basically quoting, like, in either Jesus or somebody who was giving, like, a speech, and they're presumably, ostensibly, they're quoting him word for word, which is a little hard to believe. But I don't see any reason to doubt that there was a man who is the subject of these books. His name wasn't Jesus. It was something more like Joshua. Well, I guess Yeshua,
Hmm.
which is also interesting because he's named after the Joshua who had the microchip that he hid under the tree. Same name,
Right.
right? So maybe there's meaning in that. I don't know. But one thing I do know for absolute certain is that we have done a very shit poor job of passing along the message that Jesus was here to give. So whether he was real, or historical, or whatever, even if you can say yes, 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 it's still a no in the end, because the model that we present, the model that we comprehend in our mind, in our theology, is not that man. So does Jesus exist? Well, which Jesus are you talking about? The historical one, the guy whose name was Joshua, or this weird thing that we've somehow built him into? Yeah, those are very different questions.
Right on. Man, this is fascinating. We could talk for hours. Let's close on this. How do you feel about what's happening? There's been a lot of changes in the past few years in people's perception of, not just paranormal or UFOs, but what's going on in reality. We've been lied to, and it's coming to the surface that most of the things from our education system to medical to, things we were talking about earlier, politics, it's all misleading. It's not the way it is, and people are starting to figure that out now, and there's a lot of changes happening. But along with that, the same people who were deceiving us in the past are trying to tell us that UFOs are out there now, and we should and there's a department in the Pentagon looking into it. And of course, I don't trust any of the BS coming from them, but I want to get your
Right.
thoughts on where do you think this is going and why, and things of that nature.
Right. Okay. Well, it's a fascinating question. And I think it's very layered, and I don't think that there's a simple answer to that. Okay, so let's look at this one example about the 75 elders who go up the mountain. Why is it that no pastor has ever, I've never heard a sermon on that, and I've heard hundreds of pastors give thousands of sermons. You would think that over 50 years, you would hear everything, but it's not the case. And so is that because they don't know that that's in there? I sort of suspect they don't know. I don't think that, okay, some of the pastors that I know are very rational, reasonable, and intelligent, and are good people. And I don't think that some of these guys, I don't think are intentionally lying. That's not necessarily true of everyone, but certainly I've met people who are basically doing the best they can with the information that they have. And so I think that is a pretty large set of people who are in that category. But of course, they've got bad information. So it kind of, you do have to circle back at some point to the fact that somewhere somebody had to have known and purposefully hid it or lied or whatever. So, yeah. Is there a conspiracy? Well, yeah. But is the conspiracy the thing that you think it is? Probably not. And this brings me to one of my underlying philosophies, is that we really only use models. So every day when I wake up, I go, oh yeah, where am I? Oh yeah, I live on Earth, and here are some facts. No, I don't have time to do all that stuff every morning. I just need to get on with my day. So what I do is I use my assumptions from previously, and I know full well that my assumptions are full of holes, but they're good enough for now. They'll get me through the day, except for on those days when they don't. And those are the interesting days. But this is the thing, is we need to be able to I guess, recognize that we're taking shortcuts mentally. We have to. There's no way to survive in life without doing it. And yet when we do that, we are compromising truth. And even if truth is our number one priority, as it is for many people, it's impossible. It's impossible to be entirely true. So all we're doing is we're going, okay, I'm going to try to think about this particular thing today. What do I know about it? Well, okay, so let's look at it. I used to do a lot of model train stuff, so HO scale railroading. And one thing you notice between the different scales And there's a difference between like a serious modeler model and, say, a Thomas the Tank Engine. They're both modeling the same thing, but they're taking very different approaches to it. Why? Because they are they're picking different attributes to focus on. So if you play D&D, when you build a character, you have 6 attributes, and you have to decide which one or two you're gonna focus on, and the rest are gonna get low scores because this character, he's gonna have low charisma or whatever. And it's the same thing with models. And this is what we do every time we think about anything. We're creating a series of patterns in our brain and in our mind and in our psyche of whether those are created out of neurons, electrical pathways, and all these things. So we're creating a simulation of the thing that we're trying to think about, and it's in your brain. It's not the thing itself. So if you look at an elephant and you go, oh, I'm going to think about this elephant, the elephant itself is not in your brain. What you have is a model that's representing what you think that elephant is. And that only can be as accurate as, well, for one thing, what you actually know about elephants, which might be a lot less than you think you do, and how much time you have to sit there and build it. Like, how much detail are you going to go into? Are you going to use a just-in-time rendering type of a situation where you're not going to do this whole huge like wireframe construct of everything that everybody knows and has ever known about elephants? You can't do it. I'm not a microbiologist. I can't go to that level. I'm not an animal behaviorist. I can't go to that level. So when I think about an elephant, well, it's got thick legs and flappy ears and a long trunk. Now, I only know that because I've looked at a few different pictures of elephants, not just one picture. But there's a classic story about 3 guys looking at an elephant through a fence, and basically there's this wooden fence with knot holes in it, and each one of them is just sticking their eye up to the knot hole. The elephant's right in front of them, but one can only see this flappy ear. One can only see this weird long trunk. He thinks it looks like a snake. And the other one sees a leg. It looks like a palm tree. So an elephant is a flag, a palm tree, and a snake, depending on where you're looking. And really, that's all we ever have, is that we have these very crappy analogies to what we're thinking about. And that is really, I think, the key to surviving as a human, because humans rely so heavily on our brain and building these models, but all of these models are fundamentally flawed. But that doesn't mean that we throw them away. We use them the best we can. So yeah, there's totally people who are doing that on purpose, probably, but most of us are just like, I don't know, all I see is an ear.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, man. Ken, that was amazing. I definitely love to talk to you again sometime in the near future. I know we barely scratched the surface of some of this stuff. Before you head out, let the audience know where they can get your book, website,
For
social
sure.
media, all that good stuff.
Okay, yeah. So go to my website. It's dimensionfold.com. That's dimension, as in like 3-dimensional, but just dimensionfold.com. And if you put a UFO in front of that, ufo.dimensionfold.com, it'll take you directly to that one book. And if you leave it off, you'll see a whole bunch of other stuff that I'm involved in. I also do publishing for other authors as well, and that stuff will be on there as well. So yeah, check out the site. There's lots of cool stuff on there. I also have a YouTube channel. It's to be honest, I'm not really sure how to tell you the best way to get there, but probably if you search my name, Ken Goudsward, YouTube, you should find it.
Right on.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Definitely. This was excellent. And like I said, we'll have to definitely do this again sometime in the future. So
For
thanks
sure.
for coming on. Yeah. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll be talking again tomorrow.